Oh,
Okay, good evening, everybody. It's wonderful to see so many people on the Zoom, and especially on such a lovely evening. But it's good to see everyone, and I'm sure that this is going to be an interesting mystery to be solved. Hope everyone's enjoying the weather. It's a little on the warm side. I've been out walking my dog and trying to keep my plants hydrated, so it's challenging at this point in May to be doing it, but you got to do what you got to do. I just wanted to say that thank Ken for putting together every week the beautiful photographs that have been coming in from a lot of our members. They're beautiful pictures, and I know I've been enjoying seeing them, and I'm sure a lot of you have as well. So thank you, Ken, for organizing that. A large album every week of photographs. It's pretty amazing what's out there. I don't know whether there were any announcements particularly, Ken. Is there anything to talk about for next month?
I think we can get started whenever you're ready.
Get right into the presentation. Okay, in that case, I will hand it over to you to introduce our speaker for tonight, Donnell.
Okay, our guest speaker tonight is Donnell Gasbarrini, and Donnell received her formal education in biology from the University of Guelph, like a lot of our speakers. They say the University of Guelph puts out good speakers. And Laurentian University, poor old Laurentian, going through hard times right now, and has been informally educated by many mentors, mentees, habitats, and species that she's been fortunate enough to work with. Donnell is currently the Adopt a Pond coordinator at the Toronto Zoo, and Donnell will probably tell us a bit more about what that program actually does and is, where she is applying lessons learned in more remote settings to the urban jungle. The presentation today is based on the work that made up a large portion of Donnell's master's thesis, completed at Laurentian University, based on a population of Blanding's turtles on Manitoulin Island. So with that, I'll turn it over to Donnell, and you can share your screen.
All right, great. Thank you so much. And thanks to everyone for coming out tonight to listen to this talk. This is a great turnout. Okay, here we go, sharing my screen. All right. So can I just get a thumbs up or something? Can you all see that? And it's taking up the whole screen now. It should be nice and big.
Where's my thumb? There's my thumb.
Perfect, thank you. Yeah, so as Ken said, my name is Donnell, and this presentation is based on research that made up my master's studies at Laurentian University. Like so many, well, like pretty much every great project ever, this is not the result of one person doing everything. This is the culmination of a really great and fantastic team. So at Laurentian, I had Dr. Jackie Litskis and Dr. David Lesbarrer as my two co-supervisors, and committee members were Anna Shepard and Ed Morris from Ontario Parks. And truly was a dream team. I was very lucky to work with each of these individuals. And so today I'm super excited to share with you the murder mystery at Misery Bay. This is the project that brought me to a new area of Ontario that I had never been to before. It introduced me to new species, and it really holds a special place for me. And it's nice to see some familiar faces here in the audience. And actually, the name that shows up is Amanda Bennett, and Amanda Bennett is with Matt Keeble. And Matt Keeble came out with me on my very first day at Misery Bay and taught me the ropes. So yeah, just a little shout out to Matt. So let me move on my slide. So yeah, today was an office day. I don't always look like this. Sometimes I look like that girl on the left there, holding a bunch of equipment, wearing chest waders, smiling really big while out in a wetland looking for turtles. And of course, as I mentioned, there's always so many helping hands involved to wade through these waters, sometimes fall over and get soaking wet, and to catch a lot of turtles and collect a lot of data. And now this project took place on Manitoulin Island, and I'm sure that many of you are familiar. I hope that some of you have had the chance to visit, and that maybe more of you will have that chance in the future. But this is an island that is in the northern area of Lake Huron, and it is very much kind of, it's not super busy. It's very nice and it's quiet, and the threats that animals and wildlife face in other areas of Ontario are very different here because the human presence isn't quite as great. And so so I was very lucky to be studying here. And I'll just go through a brief timeline, or I should say like a short timeline, to set the stage here a little bit. So this is a photo that is dated 1965. And so this is a young boy holding a Blandings turtle. And I'll talk more specifically about the Blandings turtle in a minute. But for now, all we need to know is that Blandings turtles have been on this landscape and using these habitats for many, many years, and go way back farther than 1965. But just had to include this photo to get our timeline started. And in 1989, Misery Bay Provincial Nature Reserve came into existence, and it has since changed to a provincial park. And as the name of the talk, and probably you've caught on to this already, that's where this study takes place, is currently called Misery Bay Provincial Park. In 2012, Ontario Parks Ecologists, who oversee many parks in the northeastern region of Ontario, they were at Misery Bay and they were there to do plant inventories. So they were going through wetland habitats, they were cataloging plants that they were seeing, and they were surprised, pleasantly surprised, to be finding a lot of turtles. In the span of just a couple of days, they found upwards of 20 turtles. And this is, you know, when they're out there not really looking for them. And it wasn't the kind of scenario where the turtles were all basking on a log in the sun. They were finding them throughout this habitat, and basically just kind of one after the other, turtle, turtle, turtle. So they decided that the year later, in 2013, they would return to the park and they would focus their efforts on the turtles that were there. But when they returned in 2013, the scene that they were met with was very different from what was seen in 2012. They found, instead of numerous live turtles, they were finding these carcasses. And as you can see in the photo, many of them were quite deteriorated by the time that they were found. And so the following year, in 2014, is when I came onto the scene. So this is when I started my study at the park. And it ran for about 2 years. And so, so yeah, this is what I'll be sharing with you today. So every good murder mystery has a victim, and the victims that are part of this story are the Blandings turtles. So Blandings turtles are a threatened species here in Ontario. They're one of the 8 different species of turtles that we have here in the province. And you can see in this photo, they're, well, I hope you can see, they're quite a charismatic animal. They have a very high dome to their shell. They have this face that looks like it's always smiling, and this really bright chin and throat area, as well as some yellow on their legs and on their neck, some specks on the shell. And so they're a species that is facing a lot of challenges here in Ontario and elsewhere. And this is our victim. This is who our story centers around. And so when we're talking about a murder mystery, what are we really talking about? We're talking about 53 carcasses that were found in a very, very short amount of time. And one of the big questions is like 53. Okay, what does that mean? And it's a little bit difficult to answer. The answer kind of comes full circle at the end of the study. But basically, at the very beginning, at face value, 53 is a lot. It's a lot of individuals to be lost in a very short amount of time. And so this was, the number of carcasses that were found. And this is the landscape on which they were found. So Misery Bay Provincial Park, within it has a provincially significant wetland, and it is mostly fen habitat. So it's quite a shallow wetland, lots of flooded pools, as you can see here, an abundance of vegetation, a lot of sedges and grasses, cedars and tamaracks. And it has several tributaries that run from the north down to the south, and they eventually empty out into Misery Bay itself, which is a bay that is right on Lake Huron. And so this was where the turtles were found, different areas throughout this wetland. As far as Blanding's turtles go, they can live in areas that are much deeper and have more sort of open water and less vegetation. But this habitat in particular was quite, well, compared to others, quite shallow. We didn't need any like boats or anything to get around. We could move around on foot. It was slow and involved a lot of slogging and pulling our feet through the mud. But yeah, and you can see here, it's kind of dark and gray and brown, might be kind of what you're picturing when you think of a murder mystery. And that's kind of what I thought at first too. And then over the weeks that I spent there, I started to see little pops of color coming out from just about everywhere. Some beautiful, beautiful flowers came to be, and Misery Bay didn't seem so miserable anymore. And actually, this is why if we look up from all the small flowers popping out at our feet, this is what we were seeing just a few weeks after that original photo was taken. So things had brightened up, the vegetation had really turned green, the whole place was full of life. But that didn't change that this was the site of our murder mystery. And truly, this was a scenario of trouble in paradise. And so when the carcasses were found, as I mentioned earlier, they had deteriorated quite a bit. So the keratin, which is the layer of the shell that contains the color pigments and gives turtles the patterns that we see on their shell, it had separated from the bony parts of the shell in many cases. And you can see that in these photos. We've got the white is the bone part of the shell showing. And I hope you can see my mouse here, but this photo here on the left and the photo in the middle, those two are upside down. You can actually see the spine running through the shell. And then this one is right side up. So we're looking down on the top of what would have been the turtle's shell. And so, yeah, you can see that the layers of the shell have come apart. The small bones that are associated with the head, the legs, and the tail were missing in most cases, and there was no soft tissue left. And now this presented a great challenge, because with all of that soft tissue and with those small bones and the more the carcasses as they were soon after death, all of that with it, sorry, how am I trying to say this? All of the clues that would have been really telling and really helpful in determining what happened here, they vanished with all of those elements. And so trying to piece this together was quite a challenge. And what we ended up looking at as the main suspects, the three main areas that we looked at were disease, failed overwintering, and predation in the active season. And so the reason that these were chosen was largely because of the site itself. So this is a protected area. It's in a fairly remote area within Ontario, and the carcasses were all there. They were found. And so we know that these turtles weren't poached. They weren't removed from their habitat. There was nothing to suggest that it could have been a result of pollution or anything sort of along those lines. So we were following these three leads, and these truly are risks that all turtles face throughout their ranges. And they're all very, they're more natural as opposed to being very closely linked to human behavior or actions. And so, yeah, and then the failed overwintering category was broken up into kind of subcategories. So we looked at predation, at freezing, and lack of oxygen. So the winter season for turtles is an extremely vulnerable time. They go into a state where they're essentially hibernating. They stay under the water, or sorry, I should say under the ice in water, in areas that don't freeze completely. And the key to this is that they need to be somewhere very, very cold because they're ectotherms. So they're cold-blooded. Their environment determines their body temperature for them, which is different from an animal like us. We're warm-blooded, we're endothermic, and we control our own body temperature through a lot of different physiological responses. And so for the turtles, they want to stay very, very cold, and this is beneficial to them because it reduces the amount of energy that they're using through the winter. They're able to really slow down all of their inner mechanisms. And yeah, they're not using a lot of energy and their oxygen demands are very, very low. But also in this state, they're not able to move very quickly. They cannot respond to threats like a predator coming upon them. Even a turtle that is known for its sort of aggressive behaviors, like a snapping turtle, in the wintertime truly can't defend itself. And if the water gets too cold and turns to ice, the turtles can get trapped in it and they won't be able to survive. And then if there's too little oxygen in the water, the blood of the turtles can actually become acidic, and so the pH in their blood will become dangerously low, and that is not good and can be lethal as well. So a lot of different threats in the winter, and this all just goes to show that the area where a turtle chooses to spend the winter is very, very important, and it has to meet several different types of criteria so that turtles can survive till the following spring and come out and resume their active lives again. And this is especially a large threat here in Ontario, and especially towards like the northern region where turtles are found, because of course the winters in these areas are very long and can go anywhere upwards of 4 to 6 months, as you'll all know. So yeah, so this is what we were looking at. And so I'll go through each of them in a little more detail. So for disease, there are a lot of diseases that I'm sure are not as well known. The whole study of disease and medicine in this whole area for reptiles and amphibians is really quite a young science. And so what we were focusing on were ones that we do know about. And so the one that we targeted is called ranavirus. And this is something that can be passed between amphibians, fish, and turtles. It's something that they can all carry, and it's been determined to have been the cause of death of turtles just south of the border in the northern United States. And so with this information coming out at around the same time as this study was ramping up, it seemed logical that this would be something to look into. And so a challenge that we faced here was that, like I mentioned earlier, there was very little, there was no soft tissue left on the carcasses. And that's what would have been needed to test for ranavirus or for suites of other viruses as well, and other diseases. So what we did is we sampled the frogs that were in the area, and we were basically using the frogs as a proxy, and we were trying to see if ranavirus was present in the frog populations in the area, then perhaps it had also been transmitted to the turtles, and that had been a factor that led to their death. And then moving on to the failed overwintering, we'll start with the freezing bit here. So this is a turtle's butt, and you can see the tail here. The left back leg there and the right back leg is there. And this turtle has been equipped with some hardware. So on the left side of the turtle, we've got this mass here with this piece coming off. So this is a transmitter. And this is a live turtle. I know it's not the greatest of photos, but the idea that we were pursuing with a lot of the work that went into collecting data to put all this together, it relied on the turtles that were still living within these habitats at Misery Bay. So we were using these transmitters, we put them on the turtle shells just temporarily, and we would track the turtles routinely so that we could see what areas they were using, what areas they were not using. And we were basically trying to use the information from the turtles that remained in the habitat to tell us a story about those that used to be there. And so, yeah, this piece here allowed us to track each and every turtle. Each one has its own frequency. So it's similar to like a radio. We could tune in to each frequency individually, and we knew exactly which turtle we were targeting. We knew if it was male or female, and this was based on adults. So the turtles that we were tracking were all adults. And then this piece over here is an I button. So it's a temperature data logger that records the temperature. You preset however often you want it to record the temperature. And so what I did is from late September until about April, we had these on the turtles, and they were recording the temperature every half hour. So a lot of data came from these, and it was super interesting to look at and see all of it, and see the temperature profiles of these turtles throughout the entire winter. And that was exactly what we were trying to do. We were putting them on before the turtles went into hibernation, so in the mid-fall, and then we were taking them off once the turtles emerged from hibernation in the spring, so April and May. And then to complement this, we had these this very sophisticated equipment, these bricks, which my field technicians who worked with me and I, we brought these in our backpacks out into this wetland, and we put them around, and we focused on areas where the carcasses had been found. And what we were looking for is we were looking for a way to compare the temperature profile of the areas where the turtles died to the areas where the live turtles were still using to hibernate, because we weren't sure exactly when the turtles died. We just knew that it had happened sometime between the ecologists visiting in 2012 and then visiting in 2013. And so we were essentially using this as a way to look at the quality of the overwintering sites, potential overwintering sites in the park. And then we had freezing. So we recorded, using the I buttons, recorded different kind of temperatures of importance. So the first one here is the lowest temperature that a turtle reached during the winter time. And the lowest temperature that the I buttons recorded on a turtle was 0.0 degrees Celsius. The lowest temperature that was recorded by a brick was negative 5.4 degrees Celsius. The average turtle temperature was 2 degrees Celsius, and the average brick temperature was 2.74 degrees Celsius. So there's a couple of main takeaways here, and the first one is that the turtles did not go below 0 degrees. None of them did through the whole time that they were being monitored. And I should have mentioned that we did this monitoring over 2 winters. So we had 2 separate winters worth of data on this. And this was really neat. This is something that I had read about and that I understood in theory, like, yeah, okay, the turtles want to be cold, but not too cold. But to see it so well represented in the data where the turtles got so close to that 0 degrees threshold, but never went below it, that was really, really neat for me. And then the other main piece that is a takeaway here is that the temperatures that were recorded by the bricks, there was much more variability there than there were among the temperatures that were recorded by the I buttons that were on turtles. And so during the wintertime, turtles, like I said, they don't really have the same capacities for movement and that sort of thing that they do during the summer, but they can move small distances. They can adjust themselves in the water. They can move very short over very short amounts of space. And this could be for temperature regulation and also to access areas that have slightly more oxygen in the water. Whereas the bricks obviously would have been stationary because they're bricks. And then we also were recording the dissolved oxygen content in the water through the winter. And so we found You can see these values here. These are what we found for the months of February and March. And then I've added in here some comparative values from a very different habitat in a different area of the province, but just to give a little bit of insight into how little oxygen needs to be in the water for Blanding's turtles to survive the winter. So this area in Algonquin is somewhere where Blanding's turtles do exist. They inhabit that area. You can see the values are much lower than what we were recording at Misery Bay. And so for this reason, it seemed that lack of oxygen could not be the culprit here. And now we're switching over to looking at predation in the active season. So that would be anywhere from the springtime through summer and into fall. So basically any time when the turtles are not hibernating. And what we did here is we took a little bit of a different approach, and we used a couple of models of turtles. And we were basically setting them out in the wetland paired with a motion activated wildlife camera. And we were hoping that, that the models would entice predators and would enable us to get a better idea of what potential predators are in the area. So, oh, oops, I didn't mean to flip it that fast. So this turtle here on the right, this is a live Blanding's turtle, being a very good sport and taking this photo. And then this here is the model. So it was made of like a material, kind of like a Nerf football, kind of like a foam. It was painted pretty well. It was pretty convincing in the way that it looked. And so we put them out in the habitat, and it's a little bit difficult to see, but I've circled in red there the model that we had out. And when we put them out, we used a piece of wire, and we wrapped the wire around the top of the turtle and put it under the ground. And basically, we were hoping that it would act as an anchor so that if something came by and tried to take the turtle away quickly, it would have to spend some time in front of the camera fighting to get the turtle out of the ground. And then you can see, oops, the camera is over here on a stake. So it's pointed right at the decoy, and it's motion activated. So anytime anything moved in front of it, whether it be an animal or a piece of grass, it would take 3 photos, and all of the photos would be time stamped. It'd have a date stamp on them. And so we were looking to find out what predators are in the area. We ended up getting a lot of photos, and I've got some of them here to show you. So we got some sandhill cranes, which were very exciting, really beautiful birds. We got a lot of white-tailed deer. You can see that this camera ended up on quite the tilt. We got some coyotes, some Canada geese, some very curious park visitors, and we got some animals like otters. So otters are in the same family as weasels and mink. Sorry, it escaped me there, and mink. So these are mustelids, and otters have been documented preying on turtles in other areas in past years, and they're very crafty. They're very smart, and they're very well able to use their hands to manipulate objects and this sort of thing. So we had seen a lot of presence of otters as well as mink in the park, and this included things like tracks and scat, and then we eventually did capture them on the cameras as well. And something else to kind of add to this line of evidence were the old injuries that we were able to see on the turtles that were still alive in this area. And so a lot of the turtles had old injuries that looked like these ones here circled on the screen. So the photo on the left is of a marginal scute, so one of the pieces of the shell around the outside, and you can see it's got a big chunk missing from it there. And then the turtle on the right has a couple of points that like dents in it basically, and then that really long kind of scrape, and it's not circled but you can see like a paired one down here, just almost cut off from the photo. And then this was a turtle that we were tracking at the time, turtle number 18, which you can kind of see the 18 written there on her transmitter. And so the turtles that we were tracking, we were able to keep a really good record of what injuries they had before we started and what injuries showed up as time went on. And this was one turtle that showed non-fatal injuries, but injuries nonetheless during the study. So you can see these two pieces here that are circled. Something had kind of, I suppose, chewed on her and had broken away at the keratin layer of the shell. And you can also see on the transmitter, there's these gray areas that are poking through. The photo doesn't really do it justice, but when we had this turtle in hand, we were able to see that something had chewed away at the epoxy that was holding the transmitter to the turtle's shell. And it kind of seemed like the transmitter being this sort of like bulb that was sticking off of the shell, it might have been like the size that something could really get into their mouth and chew on. So anyways, we noticed all of these both old and new injuries on the turtles. And certainly predation is something that is a part of a turtle's life. It changes as they age. So when turtles are young, they're obviously not as big, their shells are not as hard, and they're not as well able to fend off predators as they are when they're older. But even when turtles are older, there are animals that prey on them. And the kind of key is that there shouldn't be, for the turtles to persist anyways, there shouldn't be factors that are tipping the scale in favor of the predators. And this is something that is seen a lot in urban areas where predators have access to a lot of garbage and food waste from humans. And this allows the predator populations to really boom because they have this almost unlimited resource, and the mothers are able to feed their young so well, the young are able to find food so readily on their own and to grow and then repeat the cycle. And then when you have so many predators, it really it increases the number of individuals who are out looking for prey, and that prey might be a turtle. But this isn't something that came into play in this area just because of the nature of it. Of course, there's small communities around and there are people visiting the park, but it's certainly not the type of area that was prone to a lot of extra waste that was being picked up by predators. And so anyways, moving along here. You'll remember the decoy here from just a couple of slides ago. It looked bright and shiny, smiling big when we put it out. And then before too long, we came back to check on them. And this is how one of them looked. So it's upside down. It's on the vegetation. And you can see here circled in red, there's a few pieces of foam that had been torn off of it. And then here's like a side profile. So you can see that would have been the head, this part here, and then the front limbs would have been on either side at about this position. And so I'm sure that some of you, maybe most of you, are familiar with Murphy's Law. Anything that can go wrong will go wrong. And this was one of the largest sources of frustration, I should say, that I encountered with this project. And that is that when this decoy was taken from the spot where it was anchored to the ground and where it was picked apart, the camera took exactly 0 photos. And that was pretty upsetting because we had been so diligent. We had been checking the cameras and the decoys, and everything was working and going okay until it wasn't. And when it wasn't is when something happened. So tears were shed, and then we had to move on with what we could. And so this is obviously quite anecdotal, but it is interesting to note the pattern that we see here. So you can see that the top of the shell, which is called the carapace, it's largely intact. And what we're missing are the front limbs, the head, and if I go back a slide, you'll see that the back limbs and the tail didn't remain intact either. And so this is important because as we were looking into the potential predators that we found in the park, and looking into the essentially the tools that they have, be it their teeth and claws and this sort of thing, and then the patterns that are shown on the prey that they act on. Something that really stood out is that animals like otters, this sounds like a strange thing for someone to study, but there is literature to show that when otters prey on animals, and particularly on turtles, they target the head. And this is likely because the head is such a great source of protein and fatty tissue in the brain. And then they go for the legs. And of course, in the legs, we have more soft tissue, we have muscles. And then and often they'll kill more than what they'll need to fully consume. And so anyways, this was just obviously not a perfect line to be drawn between the two, but it was what we had. And so interesting to note nonetheless. And so we've done all of this and we've tried to piece together as best we could what happened. And what it seems like is most likely is that, so I guess I'll do a quick recap. So as far as the threats we looked at, the frogs that we examined for ranavirus, none of the samples that we took came back positive. So we had no evidence to show that ranavirus is present in this area. And then the turtles, from the overwintering data, we could see that they were choosing spots within the wetland that were appropriate, where they could both find good temperature, water temperatures to stay at, and also where they had access to oxygen in the water. And we did find both predators present. We found injuries on turtles that were old, as well as new injuries on turtles that we were tracking. And then we found that decoy with a very suspect method of, what do you call it, destroying? That's not the best way to phrase it, but I hope you know what I mean. And then all the while we were also capturing all of the turtles that we found and recording data on them. And we were looking to find how many females were there, how many males were there, how many juveniles could we find in the habitat. And all of this was to help us put together a better picture of the population that remained. And so what we found remained were 47 turtles. And this is by no means all of the turtles in the area. There are certainly turtles present within the habitat that evaded us over the years that we were there. And then there were some turtles that we caught multiple times. So whether they were unlucky or just not as great at hiding, I couldn't tell you. But it is significant that this number is less than half of the total number of carcasses that were found. We were out there pretty much every day for 3 seasons. And this is the total number of Blanding's turtles that were found. And so going back to the first number that I presented you with, the number 53 for the number of carcasses, it is, yeah, this is very significant. Turtles have a very long life history and long drawn out stages. So when they first, when a turtle lays her eggs, the eggs are very small, obviously very vulnerable. A lot of animals will target nests and eat eggs because of the great source of protein that they are. And then when the turtle eggs hatch, the hatchlings are very small. They're only about the size of a loony or a toonie. Their shells are still quite soft and they fit into the mouths of a lot of different animals. Anything from a raccoon to a fox, skunk, great blue herons. A lot of animals will eat baby turtles if they get the chance. And then once turtles are bigger, their shells are very hard and they're better able to use that armor to protect themselves. They have stronger muscles, they have claws, and they can kind of, employ all of these different features to escape from predators. And once they reach adulthood, which can take 15 to 20 years, up here in Ontario, where they grow and mature slower than they do farther south, where the winter seasons are much shorter. So once they reach maturity, they'll start reproducing, and females will start laying, clutches of their own. And a female turtle will continue to lay eggs throughout her life. They don't reach this sort of point like animals like we do, where the reproductive systems start to fail and break down and are no longer functional. Turtles can continue to reproduce, and that's part of what enables the populations to be sustainable. They really the whole population relies on the adults to stick around and reproduce for a long time to offset the number of the young ones that don't make it, because that's the more vulnerable part of their life. And so something that's worth noting here is that in other areas of Ontario where there have been mortality increases noted, it's taken a long time to start to see recovery. And one of the examples that I often draw on comes from Algonquin Park, where there was a significant increase in mortality, and significant, like I'm talking like 10%. So significant, but not what we've seen here. And that happened just shortly before I was born, and the population has not fully recovered yet. So it's something that can happen very quickly, and that has a really big, long, drawn out recovery period, if at all. And so the question is, like, is 47 enough? Is this population going to be okay moving forward? Will it rebound? Will it be healthy again? Or is this sort of a terminal problem? And so part of what I did through my studies is I conducted several population viability analyses. And so these are our models that incorporate a lot of different information. We included as much information as we could that was specific to this study area. And so, these pieces of information included like the ratio of males to females. We included information about the survival rates of different life stages, and we could manipulate different factors. And basically what we were looking at was a projection, a mathematical projection into the future of what was most likely going to happen to the number of individuals in the population. And so I'm not going to get too far into it, but basically what we saw is that it would be necessary to do conservation initiatives in this area. And some of those initiatives and future steps, like definitely continued monitoring. It's really important to figure out if this was a one-time thing, or if this was something that was going to continue year after year. And something that I'll mention is that during the time that I was out there, so for three seasons, we found some turtles that had died, but nothing close to what had been seen before. And it was something that would be described as much more normal numbers. So yeah, definitely continued monitoring within the habitat. Nest protection. So some of you may be familiar with these nest protection cages that can be put over top of a turtle's nest, and they keep out predators. So they're anchored to the ground. There's different ways to do it. And then they have those little notches out of the frame at the bottom so that when the young turtles hatch, they can crawl out and they're not trapped within the cage, they can escape. So yeah, nest protecting is one route. Head starting is another, where eggs are incubated in captivity and the young are kept in captivity, and then released at a later point where they're older and better able to survive the threats that they'll face in the wild. And this is something that is very popular because young baby turtles are the most adorable creatures on the planet. And so it's something that people really are keen to get behind. And I've worked on a couple of Head Start programs now, and there's definitely seems to be like it's something that that has a lot of potential, but there is ongoing research looking at what the long-term benefits and long-term effects of Head Starting is. And so it's yeah, definitely an area where there's more information to come. But yeah, so these are some of the key things that like suggestions. And then the significance of this whole study is that mass mortality events, they have been predicted to increase, and this kind of coincides with an increasing with I've lost my words for probably the second or third time tonight, with less predictable weather patterns, and so yeah, we've seen evidence of climate change and the effect that that has on different global patterns, and how that results in different local weather conditions. And so something that really I'm going to circle back to that I mentioned way at the beginning is that this habitat was quite shallow. And there were several tributaries that ran from the northern area of the fen down and eventually into the bay and into Lake Ontario. And in the summer, when the two ecologists were at Misery Bay Provincial Park, they were able to walk through the wetland, and they were questioning how it could even be called a wetland because it was so dry. They were wearing like hiking boots. They weren't wearing chest waders. They weren't even wearing rubber boots, and their feet were dry. And so something that really seems to have come into play here, and that would have certainly made the turtles much more vulnerable, was the very low water level that was present in 2012. And in the years following, the habitat looked much more like it does in this photo, where it was largely flooded, with only very small sort of like islands or tufts of vegetation poking out here and there. And even those, a lot of the times when you would step on them, they weren't firmly planted. They would just kind of sink slowly and you would go down with them. And so what realistically could have happened is that this low water levels, well, we know because of the observations of the ecologists that the low water levels resulted in the turtles being concentrated into these very narrow tributaries. So when I say narrow, like some of them were not even like much longer than like a foot or two wide. Some of them were wider, but basically from the accounts of the ecologists, they were tracing some of the tributaries, and that's when they were finding so many turtles. And then when we looked at where the carcasses were found, a lot of them were found along tributaries as well. And so the concentration of the turtles to these shallow areas, and these very easy areas to follow, it's not outside of the realm of possibility that a predator would have traced along the tributaries and essentially would have had an all-you-can-eat buffet of turtles. And to add to that, the area that was closer to the bay, which is more marsh-like, as opposed to a fen, it was completely dry. And so animals that would typically live there, like crayfish, small fish, snails, that may have been primary food sources for these predators, they were non-existent at that time. And so what likely happened is that the turtles were concentrated into these small areas. The typical prey for the predators was not existent, and so the predators shifted to this secondary food source, being the turtles, and that's what happened here. So coming back to the significance of all of this, it's important as these types of events become or have the possibility to become more frequent, we need to understand what that means to the different species. So yeah, being aware of the threats to species at risk, both the ones that we are very familiar with, like habitat loss, and then these newer threats. And then being able to identify worthwhile conservation initiatives. And so just to add a little bit here about what everybody can do to help turtles. I know that I don't need to say this to a group like you, but here it is. Leave turtles in the wild. Leave everything that's wild in the wild. Nothing needs to come home with us. Respect wetland habitats. Do what you can to protect them. Vote in the interests of the environment, and use your voice and your enthusiasm to teach others that these spaces are truly very valuable and are very rich in life, and they truly do provide so much for us. You can report your sightings. So there's lots of different ways to report observations of wildlife. You may already be aware of many of them. iNaturalist is a very commonly used sighting platform. Turtle Tally is one that we use at the Toronto Zoo, and we encourage people to get involved with. But really, as long as you're reporting them somewhere, the observations all get pooled at the same higher body, and all of that information is super valuable to know where these species are currently living, and to help keep track of the long-term trends, and to anticipate the threats that they might be facing in these areas. And then, of course, helping turtles cross the road. This wasn't something that came into play with this project, but across Ontario, road mortality is a huge threat to turtles of all different species. And whenever it's safe to do so, if you're able to pull over, always making sure that your safety is the priority. If you can help get a turtle across the road, if that's a female, you might be protecting her as well as eggs that she's carrying, as well as eggs that she might lay for years and years and years on in her life. So the impact can truly be very great. And yeah, when it's safe to do so, this is just a very small thing that can have a big impact. And with that, I will wrap it up. So as I said at the beginning, none of this was the result of one person's work. This was a team effort. This all came together because of the great people at Laurentian University, the Friends of Misery Bay who pursued the funding for this project, and who were so wonderful to me the whole time that I was on the island, to the staff at Ontario Parks who provided their expertise, who trained me and who provided guidance throughout the whole project, and the Ministry of Natural Resources who provided funding for this research. So thank you all for listening to me, and thank you even more for inviting me in the first place and giving me a reason to talk about turtles. There's truly not much else that I would rather be doing. And if you have any questions, I would love to try my best to answer them.
Okay, thank you very much, Donnell. That was fascinating just to find out what the process is to go through a study like that. Amazingly dedicated bunch of of people of doing all that kind of work. I guess I had a couple of questions. Do you know what the current population is now in that area? Is it still being monitored?
It's being monitored. So either in the spring or in the fall, there's teams going out mostly from Sudbury. So staff from Ontario Parks are visiting, and I think they're basically bringing along a small crew so that they can go through the habitat during these times when it's a little bit easier to find the turtles. So yes, they are still monitoring. They have not found any more instances of this huge mortality situation, so that is promising. And yeah, just having feet on the ground and eyes on the habitat and the population, every year's worth of data that they collect is very telling for sure.
Okay, it's good to know. And I was wondering, with the fact that it seemed to be low water levels that were the problem in this particular year, is there anything that can be done about that to, to sort of prevent them from dying in such large numbers if the water levels go low again? So
that is something that someone other than myself would probably be much better at answering. There's definitely a lot about the hydrology that I don't quite understand, and despite my efforts, I still don't fully understand who or what the reasons are for altering the levels of water in the Great Lakes and that sort of thing.
Right.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's a big question, isn't it? Yeah. Was that the year when the levels were low then all throughout? Was that around that time?
Yes, it was a year that had record low water levels, and we looked back using Environment Canada data, and yeah, to see it displayed on a graph, like it was a very low year, and then the years since that time, the water has been considerably higher.
Thank you.
Just to remind people, you can put a question in the chat or you can unmute and ask it yourself. This is Ken McDonald here, Donnell. Maybe I'll just ask you, can you tell us a little bit about your Adopt a Pond program at the Toronto Zoo and what that's about?
Sure, yeah. So Adopt a Pond, it's a program at the Toronto Zoo, or a group of programs that focuses on the conservation of reptiles and amphibians. So while the zoo obviously houses so many different exotic animals from all around the world, our program works on the species that are here in Ontario. So we have 3 main projects right now. We have a Blandings turtle project, an Eastern milk snake project, and a Western chorus frog project. So we do monitoring around the GTA, and we have we do presentations. We talk to school groups, to adult groups, to anyone who will listen to us about turtles, frogs, toads, and snakes. And we have a lot of great like ID guides and resources that we can share to help people identify what they're seeing and get interested in these groups of creepy crawly animals. And we also run, as I mentioned, a turtle tally program as well as a frog watch, which are both programs that people can submit sightings of turtles, frogs, or toads. And we use that information for different conservation initiatives. And if you are interested, we have a free app. It's the Adopt a Pond app. So if you want to check that out on your smartphone, you can do that. It has built-in ID guides, and you can submit sightings right from your phone. So it's pretty handy.
It's Ray Nason here. I just have a question relating to back to the low water level, and I'm wondering if in the future, perhaps, because the lakes go up and down every, I guess, 10 or 15 years, there is a cyclical low point, although the last one was lower than anything before. But knowing that that's going to be coming, maybe something could be done, an advertising program to maybe care for turtles during those times, because they seem to be a lot more vulnerable. Just a thought.
Yeah, that's a very good point, and it's something that is important both for these like fluctuations that happen, like you're describing on this cyclical cycle, but also when I was reading about different mortality events of turtles occurring elsewhere, something that I was seeing was that there have been records of mortality events for turtles after water drawdowns that were done with the idea of like enhancing waterfowl habitat. So yeah, water levels, depending on the area and depending on the use of the area, can change for different reasons. But I just wanted to add that it was interesting to read about these changes being done for one purpose and then having these unexpected and unintended consequences on other animals in the habitat.
So now we have a question here on the chat from Paul Rollinson, and so I think it's a good question. He says, thanks you for your wonderful presentation. Were other turtle species affected or only Blandings turtles? I assume like most wetlands, Blandings are not the majority of the turtles. There must be lots of painted turtles, maybe some snappers there as well. Are Blandings particularly tasty to waters, or?
So not that I know of. But something else that was very unique about this area is that the number of Blandings turtles that we found throughout the whole study was much, much greater than what we found of either painted turtles or snapping turtles. Certainly painted and snapping turtles are present in the area, and there were some dead turtles of each of those species that were found. For painted turtles, there were 7 in total, and for snapping turtles, there were only 3. And it was definitely, it was a surprise and also very interesting to see that as we continued through our years of study there, we weren't only collecting data on the Blandings turtles, we were collecting data on all of the turtles that we were finding. And what we were finding were just in general, very, like much fewer, it's clearly late on a Thursday for me. We were
Have a
not
long
finding
weekend
nearly
as well, yeah.
presently. So yeah, it was an interesting area in that the Blandings turtles greatly outnumbered the other species. And that's where the project was focused. But yes, there were some, a handful of mortalities of both painted and snapping turtles as well.
Maybe Blandings are just the right size for her to tackle. Adult snapper might be too intimidating, and Midland-Painted turtle is just kind of one bite, you know. So
Yeah, it could be.
another question on the chat here. This is from David Seaburn. Great work. I was wondering if any data were collected on the remains of the dead turtles, such as approximate size. This would help determine if the dead turtles were all adults or just juveniles.
Okay. Yes. So the dead turtles were all collected from the habitat. There were, yeah, measurements were taken, as many as could be. Some of them were in better shape and lent themselves more easily to taking these measurements than others. But the ones that were found were, like, by and large, they were adult turtles, very few juveniles or subadults.
And maybe people might think of some other questions, but I'll maybe ask one more. Donnell, this was great detective work. And you've got a great detective name, Donnell Gasbarrini, very memorable, right up there with Hercule Poirot or Mike Hammer or Sam Spade. Now, usually what happens with these murder mysteries is almost right away another murder happens, and then there's another book, and then pretty soon there's a whole series. Is this going to be a career for you, murder mysteries, or what's coming up next?
So yeah, I mean, murder mysteries, I certainly had, like, it's such a strange thing to say because it obviously was not a project that came of any sort of like happy circumstance, but I just had the best time learning about these animals and being out there in the habitat. And I'm very fortunate to, since that time, to have worked with 2 different organizations, both focused on turtles. So before I was at the zoo, I was working at the Ontario Turtle Conservation Centre in Peterborough, which is just 100% totally focused on turtles. And then, yeah, in 2019, I came over to the zoo. And so the murder mystery part hasn't held true through the early part of my career, but the turtle part sure has.
I just got something in the mail from the Ontario Turtle Conservation Centre. Maybe other people did too. They're working on a brand new center for their work. Looks pretty exciting. When it's done, we'll have to take a club trip over there. The other thing I was wondering, I kind of, you know, I wonder how many people, when they view your presentation, right away they say, well, obviously the answer is just to shoot all the otters. There's so many times that this happens, you know, that, you know, with the spotted owls. I was just reading a book the other day where somebody was doing work with the least terns on an island off Maine. And the naturalists that work to support these least terns actually go over with guns to shoot all the black-crowned night herons. And I maybe they can justify that, but maybe just your comments on what happens in that type of conservation.
Yeah, I mean, certainly it's something that needs to be considered on a case-by-case basis. And really, like, when you're looking at these situations, that's, like, it almost seems like that's the easy answer is, yeah, like, let's just go out and we'll get rid of the predators. And more than likely, there's an underlying reason that things are out of balance. So in urban areas, like I was describing earlier, the underlying problem that's creating such abundant and such large populations of predators, it's all of our garbage that's not responsibly or properly disposed of. And so, you know, going out and, yeah, I mean, it's a quick fix and it's an easy fix and it might not be a permanent fix. But I think it's really important to investigate further and find out what is it that's that's tilting things in a way that's broken the equilibrium, and what can be done to reestablish that.
Okay, last chance for questions, anybody? I think we all agree it was a very interesting presentation, Donnell. Thank you very much. And
I've got my hand up, Ken.
What's that?
I've got my hand up. You haven't
I'm
noticed.
sorry, I thought that was applause. I'm sorry, Don. I'm not good at this job. Yeah,
Okay.
there is something, if anybody doesn't like being rude, like Don doesn't like being rude and just jumping in. If you look on reactions, you can raise a hand as well, like Don just did. Okay, the teacher recognizes the Reverend Don Downer.
Oh, thank you. A couple of things. I really enjoyed your presentation, and very, very interesting and good to learn. We've been at our cottage here on Georgian Bay and went through that time, 2013. We have a back bay that we got down to about 2.5 inches of water. So we spent a lot of money dredging it. And of course, since then, the water's gone up. But the interesting thing we've noticed in that pattern, though, is we used to have a lot of Midland painted turtles here. And as the water went up, we got more and more map turtles. And now we have almost all map turtles. And now as the water goes down, which is happening, it'll be interesting. We're going to watch and see, do we start to get more painted turtles again? So very, very interesting. And we keep statistics on how many turtles and what kind and such. And it's fun too. There is only one comment I'd like to make on your Adopt a Pond app. And I started to use it. I thought it was a great idea. But every time I tried to make an observation, I was sort of pushed to prove that I'd seen what I'd seen. And I've been studying, or I've been observing nature and bullfrogs. I don't have to wonder if I see a bullfrog or it's something else, or if it's a garter snake and something else. So I just got frustrated with the app and I stopped using it. I don't know if there's anything you could do about that, but like I say, I just couldn't justify what I'd seen when it was such common stuff that I'd been watching for 70 years. So
yeah,
just
no, I can definitely understand that. And just to make it something that's able to be used for such a large audience and to collect reliable data, we do have to have some sort of way to verify. So I'm gonna pop into the chat the Adopt a Pond email address. You can reach me there, but something just to remember, if it's helpful, is that even if you're not able to provide a photo, like even just a quick blurb in the description box with some, like a key identifying feature, that is helpful in letting us verify it. But
okay. The other suggestion I have, Donnell, is that maybe certain people, could, like the naturalist people I'm involved with, know so much even more than I do. If certain people couldn't just be qualified to make, to make observations and not have to back it up with a picture or something, especially when it's common stuff.
Yeah, fair enough. And we are going through a round of pretty significant updates. So I will keep that in mind. I know that it's time consuming and yeah, it feels like a lot to have to justify every single green frog.
I find a lot of
what I'm excited about right now is over the winter, we've dug a pond. And now we're going to document all the different things we see in it. Already we've seen leopard frogs, and we're just, every new thing we'll see we'll record in our own little pond, which we have exclusive control of. So I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, that's very exciting.
Bob Codd, I see you're unmuted. Did you want to say something?
I did. I wanted to thank Donnell. It was a great presentation, but I'm curious about Misery Bay. Are you doing any of the Head Start work that you mentioned there?
So we haven't. It's something that is a potential to pursue going forward, and I think that it's at the stage now where they're seeking more information. And so yeah, it's something that might take place in the future, but there's currently not plans to.
I'm sure there's a question on everybody's mind. Why is Misery Bay called Misery Bay, and why hasn't it been changed by the Chamber of Commerce or the park or something a little more tourist enticing?
Fair question. So the story that I was told and I truly don't know how much truth is within this story, is that Misery Bay got its name because there was a boat coming through, and it was a boat that was surveying the area, and they came upon as someone was in that area, and they were like farming, and they shouted from the boat, "What is this place called?" And then this person who was out in the open with no shade, just in the beating sun, replied, "This is Misery." And that's apparently how Misery Bay got its name.
Okay.
Why hasn't it changed? I don't know, but I kind of like it. And maybe it's only the ones who are brave and bold enough to check it out who will be able to see what truly lies there.
Well, I find a lot of these places, like there's Mosquito Lake and that type of thing, they name them that way to keep the people from Southern Ontario away, to keep it preserve the heavenly spot.
Mm.
Any other questions? If not, I've got a little special treat to end the meeting. Oh, Judy Hardy? Unmute yourself, Judy.
Oh, I was just wondering, you talked about potentially the otters were the predators, but did anyone look at see if the population of otters increased? If they had a lot more food, you would think, and they were the predators, there'd be obviously increase in population.
Yeah, so we were lacking a bit of information that would have helped with that. We didn't really know where things had started in terms of a lot of different animals at the park, whether it be the turtles themselves or potential predators. We weren't entirely sure of what exactly was there. And similarly, we didn't know what the population sizes of the different animals that were present, what those looked like. So through what we've found, we're not able to answer that question right now, but hopefully this information can act as baseline and can be compared, can be looked back upon and compared to with future information.
And Julie, you've got your hand up?
Yeah, thanks. You can hear me okay?
Yep.
Yeah, great. I wanted to know, I don't know whether you said anything earlier about what to do if we find a turtle. We found this year in the Midland Community Garden a little baby turtle. I don't know, a little bit bigger than a toonie, I guess. And I thought to walk it over. I walked over with it and passed a couple of people that begged for it for a pet. And I took it to the outflow of the little lake into a wetland beyond. And I put it close to the water, and it seemed happy to slide into the water. But I wondered if and I wish I could have taken a picture of it, or should a find like that be reported to anyone?
Yeah, if you're able to, definitely take a photo, and you can report that. Like, you could report it to iNaturalist, you could report it to Turtle Tally, and you can do that both like on your phone or on a computer. So yeah, anything like that would be great. And if you find turtles, like, it sounds like you found like quite a young turtle. It may have been like a turtle that had recently emerged from the nest, and sometimes they can have quite a journey to make on their way to the nearest body of water. And so I certainly don't, I think that moving it towards the water was good. You just want to be careful not to, of course, move them too far from where you found them. But yeah, and then if you ever find an injured turtle, you can call the Ontario Turtle Conservation Centre. I'll put their phone number in the chat here. And they, even though they're located in Peterborough, they have a network of volunteers throughout the province who can help get injured turtles over to them so that they can get rehabilitative care. And then the turtles get released back into the area where they were originally found. So that's a great resource to have on hand in case you ever find a turtle that's injured.
Just a note that we do record this meeting. Donnell approved that, and we'll send everybody a link in case they want to watch it again. But I don't think the chat gets included in that recording. But along with the recording or with the link, I'll make sure that, the information that Donnell's put in the chat gets sent along with that as well.
Super, thanks.
And if there's anything else, like I say, I was going to finish with a little special treat.
I
Are
just
we
have
good?
one more quick question. Do you
Oh,
guys
question
have
for Judy.
anything to do with scales? The scales place in Aurelia that has a reptile
Yeah,
preservation?
yeah, we partner with scales on some of our projects.
Because I know that they try to protect the snapping turtles' nests every year from the raccoons, because along the rail trail, millions of turtles put their eggs in there, but the raccoons take them before they've even been there for very long. So they've been putting cages over and trying to protect them. But
That's the Kids for Turtles organization as well, but yeah.
yeah, I think they're associated with that. Yeah, through scales. But so you do have an association with them as well.
Yeah, definitely. And they do a lot of great work.
Good.
Okay, I'm going to try to share my screen here. And I have a little bit of music to end the program. And as usual, if people want to leave, and I would recommend you stay and watch this fascinating thing, but you can kind of filter out while it goes on or say goodbye at the end, but this will kind of wrap up the meeting. This is something that was shared with us by one of our Midland-Penetanguishene Field Naturalist members who's never able to join us on these things because she's up in Saulog Bay and doesn't have good internet. This is from Mary Rajapakse. A lot of you probably know Mary. And Mary's North American name is Mary, but her Sri Lankan name is Deeptha. And this is Mary is a retired doctor. This is where she went to medical school in Colombo, Sri Lanka. And this is her graduating year was 1964. And she's still in contact with all the people she graduated with. They're spread all over the world. And some of them got involved in this project that Mary kicked off. She sent a bunch of pictures of, Mary's adept with the camera. She took a lot of pictures of birds that had nested in her yard. And then another member of her graduating class is going to sing a very famous song from Sri Lanka along with this video. And I'll just read you what Mary says. I sent this collection of photos to two of my university pals, now retired and living in Sarasota, Florida, who have taken up photography to another level to create a fun COVID project to put out into our university class webpage, with us readers now in our 70s scattered around the globe. Another retired pal has always been a great singer. This is his hobby, to keep his sanity, singing in many languages, all the old songs we sang as kids back in Sri Lanka. We took his voice for the project. So the four of us put this little video clip together using Z's singing of an old song. This is a very touching song sung by a very famous Sri Lankan singer, C.T. Fernando, in Sri Lanka back in the early 50s. And we all sang this song in Sinhalese as we were growing up. C.T.'s voice was part of our growing up. And I'll read you a little translation of the Sinhalese words. The song's, it's Pin Siduane, A Bird's Appeal. It goes, I am a mother of three mouths in a nest, can view for a moment think of my plight. They are new and tiny, yet cute and perfect. Do not aim stones at us is my kind request. Newly born lot is eternally hungry. My task as mum is tough and lofty. If you are after meat, I am very puny, and there's none to feed my kids tiny. I know that I am blessed with a lovely coat of green feathers and look attractive, very smart. If you want to showcase me in a cage of iron, I shall willingly fly into it when my kids are grown. A bird mother. Now, apparently this is a song that everybody in Sri Lanka knows from their childhood. And Mary says there's a bigger message here as I see it today. Mother Nature begging us, my dear little children, don't destroy my home. So I'll play the video with the song for you now. Whoops, I just started. I have to roll it back, just a second. Can I do that? That's better.
Mage kuda nivasa kada himano damanne Vane pura soya gosin kotu kadala Kuda kabali tudin මෙහි ගැනවිල්ලා ගසේ මුතුන්ලට උඩින් කෝටු තබාලා උදේ පටන් දවස පුරා කුඩු තනාලා එන් සිදුවෙන්නේ අනේ බාල ළමුන්නේ මගේ කුඩා නිවස කඩා බිම නොදමන්නේ කොලේ කොලේ දමා කුඩා නිවස වසන්නේ මගේ දයා පිරිඳ නිතර එය සරසන්නේ රැලේ රැලේ පුළුල් දමා යහන සදන්නේ අගේ මටයි ලදරුවනේ එය නොකඩන්නේ පෙන් සිදුවෙන්නේ අනේ බාල ළමුන්නේ මගේ කුඩා නිවස කඩා බිම නොදමන්නේ.
So there we go. That's from Deeptha, from Mary. And with that, we end the meeting. So good night, everyone.
Thank you so much.
And thank you for Donnell, if you're still here, very much.
Okay. Good night, everybody. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.
Night,
Thank
Susan.
you. Good night.
Ken.
Thank you. Good night.